What's up, beautiful people? We are back with episode 3 of this 8-part series on catalyzing your soul's deepest embodiment in the context of relationships. If you have not caught episode 1, which is how relationships serve as a portal for your most expansive healing, check it out. And episode 2 was also it was really well received. These are being really well received. People are loving this series so far. That was called, quote unquote, normalcy in relationships, because as we know, there's no such thing as normalcy in relationships. You get to define that for yourself, but watch/listen to that episode. We have this on YouTube and on all of the podcast streaming, what do you call them? Platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, happiness. Okay. So today we're talking about codependency. And I'm going to start just by talking about how fucking codependent I've been my entire life.
Same girl, same.
Yeah. And Katie and I have really helped each other through this experience. But dude, codependency is a bitch to decondition. It really is. And it doesn't really have to be. We make it so much more complicated than it needs to be. But I swear to God, like I was codependent on my mother, my father, my husband, my sister, God. Like I was codependent in so many areas. And the level of freedom that I've experienced with releasing codependency has been immensely illuminating, because it's like I'm coming back to myself and really this ownership and appreciation and love for myself. And it's also bringing me into this like really sustainable sovereignty and confidence. At the same time that even today, as we're recording this, there's moments that the loneliness or that almost craving internally can come forward. But I see that and I know it for what it is, and I know what that means and what it's telling me, which we can talk about a little bit. But I think that, it's really a process of exploration to decide that codependency is no longer something that you want to participate in. So I'm going to define codependency and then we can talk about it back and forth. But it's really, it's a term that's thrown around so much, like too often. I feel like so many people like, oh, you're so codependent. Oh, you're so codependent. First of all, it's normal to be dependent on other humans. Like it's normal to rely on each other. We are meant to be here to co-regulate, because when people are trying to quote unquote avoid of codependency, they end up going to hyper independence, which is Katie and I can attest to doing, that we've done, which we talked about, I think, in episode 1. So if you need help with that, there you go. But yeah, I mean, I think that it can go that route where it's like, I don't need anyone, right? Like I always say, independence always requires a healthy level of dependence. Codependency is when we like take on somebody else's feelings as our own, and we get into this space of needing to save them. And it becomes this triangle of like, well, I'm going to save you. And then when you don't respond to my saving, or I don't get what I wanted out of saving you, because ultimately this was about serving myself, even though I didn't recognize that, then I get mad at you and I'm pissy and I have my tantrum. And then I go into victim. Poor me. I was just trying to save them and help them and make them feel better. And look, right? And it's just this brutal cycle that really comes from a very people-pleasing space of like, but I just want to help people. Why? Because you're trying to save yourself and like make yourself feel good about yourself. And so you're technically using someone else to make yourself feel better. Yeah. So how is this presented in your life, Katie?
Oh, that one just hit like
Oh, I know.
yeah, I think I had getting tongue-tied here because like there's so many same, all the same areas that you said in the beginning, like same. I was dependent. Like if I do this, then this will happen, right? Like, and it's always that reflection back on ourselves. But I feel like how this presents most deeply in my life right now is like I just want to help people, right? And I just want to see them, like I see the potential in them immediately. And
Yes.
I'm like, oh my gosh, you like this, or your light, or this is your gift, or like, oh, just forget that belief and like switch it. And right, like I can see all of that, of course, reflecting that back to me, right? This is where you talked about blind spots in one of our episodes too, right? This is why we need other people, right? But I ended up taking that role on so much that I took I took on their problems as my own, thinking that they were mine, but then also for me to solve. It's not my responsibility to solve their problems. It's my responsibility to take care of me and offer myself the space to process what I'm processing and going through. But it's not my responsibility to make that person be what I see.
Yeah, or be what you desire. You
Right.
know? And like
Right.
we're offering them sovereignty by allowing themselves to have their own emotional experience or whatever experience they have and to choose whether or not they want to execute their potential. I am so freaking grateful that you brought up this concept of potential because I think this is so important that like we fall in love with people's potential. Whether this is in whatever type of relationship you're talking about, even client to coach, right? Like we fall in love with people like, oh my gosh, your energy is big. You have a huge mission here. Like I see you and I see what you're capable of. And they're kind of like, wah, wah, wah. And then it's like, no, 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 no. I see you. Let me extract, let me pull you forward. But then we become energy vampires. We really do, where we like suck on like leeches, even if we're not doing it in behavior or verbally or expressiveness, like energetically, we latch onto this, like it's like this leechy energy of like, but no, I know, I see this and I know, and this is going to be so good. And I can see you being at this space. And, but if they are not ready and they don't want to do it, that's their choice.
That's their journey. That's their path. And like, that's the part of like, that's still one of my hardest parts, like releasing, like they're on their own journey, just like I am. I'm sure people look at me and be like, why is she doing that? That's for me to learn, me to find out, me to explore. Right. And the same goes in the reverse. Like yeah, grasping on again, whether it's client or some other relationship in my life, like that's their journey. They have to see it. I can be maybe that spark that starts them
Yeah.
to open up to that, but all that's doing is disempowering them and disempowering me and leaking my energy, creating, I feel like those energy leaks creates more dependency or more
Oh,
codependency, right? Because you're like, oh
100%.
my God, help me, I'm so tired. Or, oh my God, can you do this chore because I don't have the energy for it? And it's like, well, where you do have the energy, but your energy is being leaked somewhere else. That's not for your highest and best. That's not something that lights you up. That's not something that you're in love with, right?
I love this
Yes.
so fucking much, Katie. And I can tell you do too, because I can like feel your energy. And I'm like, yeah, go, sister. And so that's, oh my gosh, I love this so much. Cause that's what this is about. Taking responsibility for your boundaries, not with, okay, I have a boundary with Michelle and Joe and Anita. And it's like, okay, but how fucking annoying is that, first of all? Because I can keep track, like I can keep track of like when I peed last, right? Like, so I'm gonna keep track of like which boundaries are for who. No. Okay. Like boundaries are for us. So it's like you being really, really clear on like this area in my aura is sacred, right? It's sacred. And I am in a space of being very, very clear, clean, and crisp about what I am available for within this sacred space and what I am not. Right. And when I'm clear about that, then those vibes that don't align are not going to even come to me, right? Because I'm not porous enough to be able to open to that. And it just bounces off because it's not aligned. But I think that, but I think this concept of what were you saying? It was feeling like I'm giving away all of this energy and therefore expecting people in my life to fix it for me. And I love that because it's like, no, you're responsible for your energy leaks. You're responsible for keeping those boundaries in a space where you're not trickling out and then expecting other people to pick up the pieces.
Totally.
And that's the freedom that we talked about, I think, last episode around like, this is what it means to allow both people in the relationship to feel free.
Yes, it totally is. I mean, I don't know why this example is coming up, but I'm just going to talk it out because you sent me a voice note yesterday and you were like, you're so good at finding you're happy. And it was like, oh, like, first off, you saw me, like you always see me, right? But I was like, oh my God. But I was like, okay, there's energy leaks, because for the days that I don't feel like I have a good grasp of my happiness, there's some energy leak around me. There's some boundary that I'm giving away and expecting in return, right? It's that whole like this, we're givers, right? We're
Yeah.
give, and we expect that same in return. And I don't know, as you were talking, I'm like, that's what that reminds me of. Like, and that's where I think the healthy part of our human relationships start to come in, right? You
Mhm.
can see something in me that maybe I'm not seeing, that I'm blind to, right? You can say it, I take it, and I mean, we talk all the time. There's tons of nuggets, but that's what I heard in that one instance that I was like, she's so right. I do. I do. And and so then it's up to me. It's not up to you to
Right.
show me all the ways that I am happy and that I'm good at finding my happy. It's about me saying, okay, she's so right. I know she's true. I feel that truth within me.
Yeah.
When she said that, I was like, whoa, like my heart bursted. And I was like, okay, I am good at that. So what about my energy? Right?
So this is where the mind comes in, right? Like we've been talking about the energetics behind this. And I think it's also really helpful to talk about the mind piece that you're bringing in here now, right? I'll give an example of this one, which is, so my husband was off for like a week. He's a school teacher along with like his 12 other jobs that he does, but he's a school teacher. And so he had a week off. And he had been, like, since the beginning of the school year, like a little bit more restless and like not fully himself because, I got to be honest, like since the pandemic, teaching has not been an easy profession to be in. It has not. So anyway, so he was experiencing a level of calm and relaxation and contentment that week that he was off that I have not seen in him in 6 to 7 months. So I told him, I was like, this is making me itchy, right? Because like, I'm like, it's making me itchy because I'm like, I'm seeing him and he's so calm. And I keep going like, what's going on, dude? Like, I'm like, what are you thinking that you're not sharing? Like, what are you feeling that you're not sharing? Like, because it was such a disparity from how he's been. And so I was just like, what's going on? And so I was energetically taking some of this on, but starting this narrative in my head around like, there's something he's not saying because there's this shift that, and it's like, where is it my job or business to know if there's something going on within him that he is sharing or not sharing, to know how he is feeling? Like, who gives a shit? It's not my responsibility.
Right. And I think that's where you and I have been talking so much about letting that inner teenager tantrum or that inner child tantrum, because asking if you're okay comes from those younger days where, yeah, you were expected to take on other people's responsibility. The examples of like, don't do that, mom's sleeping, or, be quiet, or, this is the situation, so be your best, right? Like, so you're constantly want to ask, like, are you okay? Something's wrong. Something's shifted, something's changed. And we take on that responsibility. And it's like, oh, that's not ours to do. Like, what if they just arrived there and found it for them? Why can that
Right.
not be good enough? Right.
Right. Let him be in his experience. Instead, it's like me projecting this hypervigilance that's coming up within me based on a history, not just with our relationship, but with my childhood, like you were talking about too. And it's just so interesting how those sneak in at certain times. And those are times I want to say very clearly to everyone, like that we are not meant to shame ourselves for, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I've worked on this for years. Why the hell is this still coming up? Instead, it's like, oh, hello. Like, thank you for showing me where there are still fragments of this present so that I can be present with myself and compassionate and loving and patient around what's coming forward. But in that, it's not putting it on him to have to explain himself, to have to justify the space that he's in, right? Instead, it's about me recognizing, and this is one of the ways that we start to release codependency, really, is recognizing, okay, I'm having this activation within myself. And this is clearly an inner child or an inner teenager, like you said, that desires my attention, that desires to be seen, that desires to be loved, that desires to feel safe and okay and grounded and held. And, and I think that that's really That's really the beauty of it, is being able to recognize the nervous system response, not have to put meaning into, well, this is from my childhood and this is why it happens. So I need to go back and understand it and heal it. No, we don't need to go through all of that. Okay. We can literally just recognize it and be like, instead of labeling it as all the stories, label it as, okay, my nervous system is activated right now. My nervous system needs some grounding. My nervous system desires some love, and bringing that parenting, bringing that love to the nervous system. And then accessing intimacy, right? Because really that's what we're looking for, is that intimacy. And that intimacy is something that we can find not necessarily from that person, right? We can find intimacy with the universe, with our friends, with ourselves.
Mhm. I think that's the other thing, right? We get attached to that person giving it back to us because we're so concerned, right, about them and their well-being or their like whatever sauce they're in, that we're like, well, now give it back to me, right? Like we do crave that, but this is where you and I have talked about, we cannot, maybe that's strongly put, I don't believe that I want one person to be my everything, right?
Correct.
I want to have intimate relationships that can see me and hold me no matter where I'm at, right? And that's not going to come from one partner, one person. That's going to come from a, a depth of friendships and relationships, because I, we're human. We're like, we have that. That's why we're here, is to create these relationships. Um, And so to your point, yeah, that's a reflection back for you to create that intimacy within yourself, within God, universe, source, or some other human relationship here. But we can't, again, I use that, like, we have to start to not put all of our eggs in one basket, like for that one person.
Yeah, and I feel like this is why a lot of people talk about the fact that marriage, the institution of marriage itself, breeds codependency. And I think it's because there's this expectation that, like, well, if I'm falling short in some area, my spouse is going to pick that up. Like, we're here as partners for life and we need to do that for each other. Where actually, if you release that requirement and you're able to really visualize it almost like you're leading parallel lives, I'm doing my life, this person's doing their life, then it lightens the energy so that you come together more often with a lightness of being where you get to have enjoyment of one another rather than reliance. That doesn't mean that, like, my husband meets a lot of needs for me, but they're not required. I am perfectly capable of doing it without him, but it makes my life even more expansive and joyful and light to have his support and assistance. So we're able to get to that point where it's like, I don't need this to feel complete, to feel like I can move forward and be my highest and best, but I can get there faster and wider and deeper with your tether and support. And I think that's a really big shift when we are talking about long-term sustainable relationships. And really, one of the biggest factors that supports long-term sustainable relationships is space from one another, space to be yourselves, because it's almost like this default when we're in long-term relationship that when something's up, okay, I'm going to go to my spouse, I'm going to talk to them about this, da 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 da. And it just becomes too much. It places a lot of pressure and burden on the relationship and the other person. It really does.
It does. And I think this is another society norm. Like, we have our parents or some guardian, right, of some sort, that through all of our adolescence, like, we're required to have their beliefs and to do the things that they do. And like, then we hop into these marriages or these other partnerships of some sort that we expect that same thing. Like, I feel like we've been like, we are codependent at a newborn, as a
Yeah.
toddler, right? To do these certain things. And so it is within us. And so that's also where I feel like a lot of the shame and guilt and all of those like emotions don't, that's how we are meant, like, that's how we're meant to do life here. Like, that's how we started. So it is deeply rooted within us. But I love how you're like, we don't have to make it mean anything and we don't have to put pressure on it. And by giving the relationship space, we don't have to just jump into the next society norm of being placed in another codependent relationship. Because that's what I feel like it is. It's like,
Right.
okay, you have your relationship with your parents and now you're going to go get married and you're gonna, like, it's like setting you up, and then like take your job, You become
Yeah.
codependent on your job because you're like, well, this is my source of income. This is my source of purpose. This is blah, 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 blah. And it's like, it's all there. And it's like, if we can step back, we can zoom out a moment and not make those mean all the things and put pressure on them to perform, pressure for them to be a certain thing and to receive something back. And we can just truly enjoy it and get into the pleasure and the, right? Like, that's where we're going to find that freedom.
Yeah, and it's about like what you're talking about is like it's about being extractive. Like I'm trying to get something from this rather than just like I love loving. I
Right.
love loving. And as long as I know and have clear boundaries, I can give as much love as I desire. I love loving and I love loving big. And I think that that's what came in when I released codependency was almost like there were parts of me, and I said this out loud a couple of times. Can I just go back to being codependent, please? Because it was really enjoyable. Like I love that feeling of like madly in love and I'm obsessed with you and I just want to like give everything to you and you give everything to me. And it's just, oh my gosh, but it's like freaking exhausting too. And I realized that this is what was coming forward with what you were just talking about when you can so easily get sucked back into it in other relationships. And I found that this was happening with God for a period of time where I was like, everything that came up, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to ask God. I'm going to give it to God. I'm going to give it to God. But it was an abdication of my responsibility to give everything to God. There's a difference between I'm going to passively surrender to God and like throw up my hand and just be like, whatever, it's in your hands now. I'm just giving it to you, right? I'm just going to let you fix everything for me. I'm still looking for you to save me. Rather than seeing myself in my power and being in this co-creative space with, you know what, I'm going to sit here and be with this and allow this to come to me. And if God has something to say, I'm open. It's going to pop in, dude. Rather than this extractive, gimme, 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 I need, like Bob Wiley from, what is that movie? What About Bob? Favorite movie. If you haven't watched it, do it. But yeah, it's that's the other thing I wanted to touch on here was this concept of like what it feels like to love with codependency feels so fucking good. It's like a high, right? It's like an addiction energy. It's a high and it's like it's an attachment like you've talked about as well. Like, and so our minds get attached to the love that we feel when we're in codependent connection. And this is where I have been beautifully invited to shift and have and you and I were literally just talking about this morning with being responsible for creating and owning and being in the excitement of life, being madly in love with my life and being responsible for finding and creating excitement and joy and expansion in my life. And like I have that. And I'm like I'm amazing. My life is amazing. It's expansive, it's phenomenal, it's fun. I have so many exciting things going on for myself and just around me. And in that vibration, I get to just be playful and light and joyful with my partner and with the other people in my life. And I have owned that feeling, that high, right, that we feel from that love. And it's not a dopamine hit like we were talking about previously, but it's a momentum generator. As I have things on my calendar that are exciting to look forward to, and it's like I get to recreate that same level of passion and activation without relying on someone else to provide it for me in some way.
Yeah. And then there's that other piece that's like when your calendar isn't full of something, right? Not becoming reliant on still that external factor, knowing that your mission and that your love for life is still present there, even if the external doesn't give you something in return, right? I think that's that next, like another next layer of that codependency.
Yep.
And the other thing that you said, what?
No, I said, yeah, I was going to say something else, but finish your thought and then I'll share it.
That's okay. Yeah, you said something else about like saving, like we expect somebody else to save us, and it's like you're look in the mirror, that is who's going to save you, right? Like again, the example I gave this morning of you being like in your voice note that you're like you're so good at finding you're happy. It's like, yes, we can have other people reflect things back to us, but it's your responsibility.
Right. That doesn't mean we don't get to feel joy in those reflections. Like I was saying, I feel more expansive and joyful when my husband helps me with some of these practical things, right? Like it feels good, but we're not latching onto it for like to feel complete, to feel stable, right?
Right, we're not to like get our next breath off of, right? Like
Oh, yes.
right? Like, yes, it might feel amazing to have somebody love you and be all gushy and like, you know, clingy, right? For for that moment, but like not needing them to complete you, not needing them to um always give you that love, right? And not always looking for them to save you.
100%, because then you get dependent on that, right? Then you get, it's like, oh, that felt good. And then you keep going back for more. And then they're like, oh, it feels good to make you feel good. And, you know, it's very easy to slip back into. And that's why for me, what I do is when this starts to come up a little bit and I go to like message the person that I want to message, I ask myself, what am I looking to get out of this? Right? What am I looking for here? Right? Because I don't want to be extractive, right? And I also want to honor my own sovereignty. Now, if I'm in a space where, like, I don't want to reach out to somebody in a space of desperation, unless, of course, it's like an emergency, right? But I don't want to reach out to somebody in a space of desperation, like, because if I, and what I'll ask myself, this is the attachment to outcome thing I was just going to bring up that kind of came up while you were talking, which was like, if I'm attached to their response in any way, I'm not going to message them because it's like, because I'm clearly looking for something. And if I'm clearly looking for something and then what they respond with is then disappointing, that is not fair to them. That is
It's not fair to you.
and it's not fair to me either. I'm like setting
No.
myself up, right? And so it's me asking myself before I send that message, right? Like, what am I looking for from this, right? And then if I find that I'm looking for something, I will go move my body, go into meditation, take a walk. I'm like, okay, I know how to clear this. I know how to be with this. And then from a more aligned space, I can make that connection to feel the intimacy and that space between us that is so nourishing and fulfilling and offer me what is at the depth of what I really, really need and not what my brain and my nervous system want because I'm accustomed to it.
Oh, I love that
And
so
this
much.
attachment to outcome piece, I wanted to talk about it just for another moment here too, that you were talking about when you like go to somebody else and it's like, you know, even when you're looking at their potential and things like that, like if you're attached to how you're saving or your interaction or you're sharing with them or your love that you're giving them, if you're attached to what they're going to do with that, how they're going to respond to that, how they're going to receive it, then you need to kind of check yourself a little bit and come back into the feeling of love that you want to offer them or whatever it is you want to offer them and allow yourself to receive some of that for yourself and give some of that to yourself and get to a place of nourishment and anchoring before you then give it to them so that you're not as attached to, because that's when it becomes this argument and this tension between the two of you, because it's like, well, I just gave you so much love. How could you not respond like that? And it's like, well, you give me love because you wanted to, like, maybe I wasn't in a space to receive it. Right. And so it's like, it feels intrusive to the other person.
Oh, that's such a good point. And it's bringing up these things of like the whole conditional love versus unconditional love.
Uh,
When you can pause and and see what you're really and see what you're looking for in that outcome in that exchange and see and because that's conditional, right? You're looking for something in that return. So if you can move your body, go for a walk, listen to music, like whatever, right? To return love to yourself, that comes from a much deeper space. That comes from an unconditional space. Because
and oh, go ahead. Were you going to say something
no,
else?
just because you're fully nourished, right? You're full.
Yeah.
You are complete because you've seen that part of you that didn't really want to be seen or that wanted to be seen, but your human didn't want to see it. You saw it. And so it's completed you by you now go taking that. And so now your love shows up unconditional versus conditioned.
100%. That's so beautiful. And I'm so glad that you shared that. I'm so glad that you shared that because I feel like, um, I think a lot of love on this planet is conditional. I really think a lot of love on this planet is conditional. And I also think that like, it's really important for people to understand that reciprocity, yes, it's okay to desire reciprocity, but what I think people don't recognize, since so many people are conditionally loving, is that when you do what Katie was just talking about with kind of nourishing and giving that to yourself and filling yourself up, it actually makes reciprocity so much easier and more natural because you're not forcing it, you're not looking for it, you're not pulling and extracting. Even if you're doing this completely out of your awareness and you're doing this energetically, right? Like it actually makes reciprocity something that feels like the natural flow of the wind, you know, because you're not trying to reach for it. And when we're trying to search and reach for it, that's when it becomes so much more conditional, right? Because yeah, reciprocity is there, like we're meant to receive, absolutely. But you don't want to go in and give so that you can receive. That is manipulative. The fact is, when you deepen trust in the universe, you know without a doubt that when you give, you're going to receive. Is it always going to be from that particular person you've given to in that particular moment? No, not always. Sometimes yes, but not always. You're always going to receive back. Sometimes it's going to be from the universe. Sometimes it will be from that person, but maybe later on.
I was just going to say, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's not always going to be from that person that you're giving it to, right? But you just need to know that that love going out is going to return to you in some capacity. And I think this is where this whole episode we started, that relationships are not 50-50, right? They're not even, right? Sometimes somebody's going to have to show up 100%, and you're not going to receive anything from that other person because they're in their own processing. They're in their own way of doing it. And so by you showing up 100% with that unconditional love, because you've taken that time to fuel you and nourish you, you're showing up fully, you're going to get something from somebody else, but it might not even be at that same level. It might be, this is very logical of our human, right? But it might be 10% from this person and 90% from another person,
Right.
or some activity, or right, it doesn't even have to be a person, but it's not about keeping score and competing. It's just like, show up with the most unconditional love in your heart, but that starts back with yourself.
It does. It does. And it's reminding me of something. What you're saying is reminding me of something with like feeling complete. You keep saying like filling up and feeling complete. And one of my clients said the other day, and it was so brilliant. And she was like, what if we're not meant to be fully full? What if
Yeah.
we're meant to have some space? Because if we're meant to have some space, and that's that piece of us that we're like, but I still feel a little empty, but I still feel a little lonely, but what if that's meant to remain open so that you can continue to have space to receive the magic and the possibilities and the source energy that is meant to flow in? And I was like, oh my gosh, that is such magic medicine. Thank you.
I love that so much, because you're right. I am saying full and complete, but no,
Yep.
I believe that we need that space. It, to me, did we talk about this in another episode? I don't know. Maybe I was saying this to a client too. Like, if you're decluttering your house, you're
Mhm.
removing things out of your house, you're making space, right? There doesn't
Yep.
have to be anything in every corner of your house. You need to leave some corners of that house open so that it can allow something in, so that it can just not even allow something in always, right? But just be open. And the same goes for us.
And what you just said is a perfect analogy for holding space for those people in our lives without being codependent, which is create space. You just talked about creating space in your physical environment. Create space. The more space that you have, right, for yourself, and this includes in your environment, in your mind, in your heart, in your energy field, right? The more space you create, the more space you have to hold that person in their whatever they're in, but being a witness and being an observer and being able to say, I see you in this and I have faith in you in this. This is what we talked about, I think, in episode 1, right? Where it's like we can hold space where it's like, I don't have to feel you. I can understand and I can get how you're feeling the way you're feeling based on your perspective and the space you're in. And I deeply trust that you can move through this and that you will move through it, whether it's now, whether it's in a day, whether it's in an hour, whether it's in 3 weeks, right? Like I am honored and grateful that you were sharing yourself with me. You're allowing yourself to be seen by me. And sometimes that's all people need, is just to be seen, just to be heard, and just to know that there's a space to place themselves rawly, which is, if you guys haven't listened to episode 1, go back to episode 1, because that's a lot of what we talked about there and more specifics. But this was really beautiful. I really love this talk today, and really good nuggets came out of this. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh, this was so good.
So fun.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And guys, next week, stay tuned, because I'm excited about our conversation next week. We're going to be talking about attachment styles and primal history and abandonment wounds and stuff like that, right? But we're gonna bring a lightness to it. I have so many opinions on this and so much knowledge on this as well. And so I'm excited to kind of merge this concept of like conscious understanding with like what's really underneath these kinds of concepts that we need to be connecting to. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. We'll be back. And thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you very, very soon. Bye.
Thank you.